Okay, Himani has already started it. Ritika, let's begin.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Yes, you are.
So we are done with the first session of our second day of the conference. So we all welcome you to the second paper presentation session 2B. The name of the session is Resistance in Folklore. So I would like to welcome our chair for this session. I'd like to give the introduction to our chair. That's Dr. Milind Solanki. Milind Solanki is a renowned academic and creative writer. He is currently working as an assistant professor at the Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar, where he specializes in the field of science fiction, folk studies, and Indian literature. With years of experience in teaching and research, Dr. Solanki is highly regarded in his academic circle. In addition to his expertise in science fiction, Dr. Solanki is also a passionate poet and incredible writer. His writing reflects his deep love for language and human experience. Aside from his creative pursuits, Dr. Solanki is also a sought-after speaker on the topic of science fiction, research ethics, plagiarism, and contemporary literature. He has delivered several lectures on these subjects at various academic forums and conferences, imparting his knowledge and experience to other scholars and researchers. Dr. Milind Solanki's combination of academic and creative pursuits has made him a well-renowned individual and a valuable member of the academic community. His love for science fiction and poetry, along with his commitment to ethical research practices, he earned him reputation as a respected and inspiring figure. Sir, it's over to you. You take the charge of the entire session.
We're very happy to have you here with us.
We're really very happy.
Thank you very much, Mritika and Miguel, for your warm welcome. Let's begin our session. The title of this technical session is Resistance in Folklore, and I hope all the four presenters are here. And it will be, a new domain, a domain where we need to research more as far as folklore is concerned. So when it was asked to me to chair a session specifically when we are talking about resistance, folklore, we have different ideas as far as folklore is concerned, and traditionally we attach folklore with all sort of myths, all sort of stories, all sort of tradition things. But when it comes to resistance, we have questions. So I hope the four presentations today, they will give a new dynamic as far as this particular topic is concerned. So let's begin with our first presenter. We have Kriti Acharya. Kriti, are you here?
Yes, sir, I'm here. Am I audible?
Yes, audible. We have Kriti Acharya with us. She is a Ph.D. scholar at IIT Kharagpur, and she'll be presenting on Sautéing resistance and seasoning it with humor, a study on Bundeli, Jyonār, Gāri. So, yes, Kriti, you go ahead with your presentation.
Sure, sir. I'm sharing my PPT. Please let me know if it's visible. Is it?
Yes.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay. All right, so I'll start my presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. As sir has already mentioned, my topic is Sautéing resistance and seasoning it with humor. It is a study on Bundeli, Jyonār, Gāri geets. Before we discuss, is my presentation moving?
Now I think, yeah, it is moving. Yes.
Okay, so before moving on to Jyonār Gāris and Gāris, I would like to introduce you all to this area called Bundelkhand and Bundeli. So Bundelkhand, when we talk about Bundelkhand, we are not referring to the political state because the political state of Bundelkhand does not exist anymore. So we are talking about Bundelkhand as a geocultural region, which is divided between two states, Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. The major chunk of Bundelkhand lies in Madhya Pradesh, and four districts from Uttar Pradesh, namely Jalon, Jhansi, Hamirpur, and Lalitpur, form a part of Bundelkhand. And when we talk about Bundeli, Bundeli is basically the central linguistic medium of this region called Bundelkhand. It is also called Bundelkhandi in colloquial terms. And there are approximately 5.6 million native speakers of this language. This data is, of course, not very fresh. It is taken from census 2011. But after the General Assembly elections, the register will be updated and we will have more data on the number of speakers. Talking about Bundelkhandi or Bundeli as a language, when George Grierson, Sir Grierson and his associates conducted this linguistic survey, they divided Bundeli into four parts. So four dialects of Bundeli continuum, if we talk about, they are standard Bundeli, mixed dialects of Northeast, mixed dialect of Northwest, and the broken dialects of South. But in general, if you are well versed or even if you understand standard Bundeli, you would be able to understand all these dialects. And when I talk about Bundeli, there are, of course, subdivisions. So the fieldwork that I have conducted has been conducted completely in standard Bundeli. And there are also subdivisions within standard Bundeli itself. And the subdivision called standard is the main dialect in which I have conducted all the interviews. Now, talking about the genre called Gāri. So the literal meaning of Gāri in colloquial terms is abuse. But when we are referring to this genre, we are referring to those ritualistic wedding songs which are meant to foster cordial relations among relatives. And these songs also give the singers, which are generally women, an opportunity to poke fun at their relatives, question their absurdities, oddities, quirks, flaws, and disrobe the hypocrisy that is prevalent in the society. And when these Bundeli women belt out uncensored Gāris, they include expletives and there are a lot of cuss words and all the politically incorrect statements are hurled at their counterparts. So they also question socio-political inequalities and publicly reprimand their male counterparts. So when we are talking about the space in which these songs are sung, I would not call this space semi-formal, but semi-informal. Because all your relatives, all your near and dear ones, including your neighbors and other people from community are present there when these abuses are being hurled at the targets. And it is a confluence of public and private sphere where very intimate affairs can also be discussed in sarcasm, slander, gossip, and that is how these things take place. And of course, these songs are occasional, but not rare, because in every traditional Bundeli weddings, these songs are sung. And they provide a space and also an opportunity for Bundeli women to express themselves freely and question all the socio-political inequalities and the familial issues as well. Talking about the methodology, so as I have already mentioned, I conducted all the interviews in standard Bundeli, and the population includes individuals as well as group of performers, both literate and illiterate, privileged and underprivileged, belonging to the age range of 35 to 80 years. I have given the figure 80 years, but I also have respondents who are above 80 years of age. And I conducted semi-structured interviews, and I was a participant observer and also an observant participant. To explain that, I don't know all of my respondents. I know some of them through my relatives. They are acquaintances. Some of them are complete strangers. So I was welcomed in some households like a daughter, where they knew who I was, and they would open up more and tell me about the specific relative they will talk about in these songs. And sometimes I was seen as a stranger who is trying to dig out more information about their culture. So they were also a bit restrained in the way they interacted with me. So I have conducted interviews in both these manners. And of course, I have recorded these songs and transcribed and translated with their consent. Now, talking about Jyonār Gāri Geets, there are several types of Gāri Geets. Today, we are talking about Jyonār Gāri Geets. These are humorous songs about food. And these songs are sung on a specific occasion, that is the Mandapa ceremony, which takes place a day or two prior to the actual wedding. And this is when the food is being served to the groom's family and the bride's family. This can be considered a work song, because the women from the bride's family are preparing the meal, and the food is being served to the groom's family while these songs are sung. So these songs help them to mobilize resistance against these dominant structures of power through nuanced sexual expressiveness and ritual humor. Two factors are very, very important here. What allows these women to transgress these socially prescribed boundaries? So first is the ritual setup, because Gāris have been traditionally sung, and these Gāris also address gods and revered mythological figures. So it is believed that these songs are not offensive. And the other thing is, the other factor is humor. So people believe that whatever is being said in good humor, just to entertain the guests. So this is a kind of shield which these women use to express their repressed emotions and question the inequalities that are there in the society in general and their families in particular. And when theoretically I look at these songs, I have read Scott. So when we talk about James Scott's work, he talks about everyday forms of resistance. And he mentions that if we look at the politics of subaltern groups in general, we'll see a lot of resistance is not overt, because firstly, they don't have the means to directly challenge the existing regimes or the power structure. Secondly, it is not economical. Thirdly, they may be dependent on the people they are questioning. And the other thing is that the people who are exercising resistance, they may not aim at the complete reversal of hierarchy. They may be seeking the betterment and the better standard of living, better living conditions, all these things. So they are not always aiming for the complete reversal of hierarchy. And this is true in this case also. Even if we talk about the work of Wigathin and Johnson, they talk about a specific form of resistance. They have termed it as embedded resistance. And they argue that whenever we talk about the politics of subaltern groups and their resistance, we see that in most cases, even while resisting, the people are not aware about the resistance they are offering. It is so ingrained in the way they behave and the way they talk back to power, so that sometimes they do not realize that they are offering resistance, but it comes out naturally. So this I have observed during my fieldwork as well. A lot of women told me that these songs are just for entertainment. But then there are also women who understands that how nuanced these songs are and how their potentials can be exploited. And of course, these songs are context specific. Of course, there are choruses as well, but there is a lot of scope for spontaneity and creativity to address the issues which are there in particular families. And I would like to explain these things through these songs. So I have song here, and the transcription is not there, sadly. I'm so sorry for that. So this is a song, and this is sung from the first person perspective of the bride, and she is basically telling everyone, all her relatives, that I am particularly good at all the skills that are required to make a good housewife, of a good homemaker, but I do not approve of the one I will be doing it for. So basically, she says that I have no choice, no say in choosing my life partner, but there's nothing that I lack. And this is also a kind of resistance which and she is offering. And when I say she is offering, actually this song is not being sung just by the bride, but all the married women who are married to the family and are performing these chores and performing all these tasks. So they are also involved. So they are speaking from the place of experience. And if we see about the sexual nuances there, she's talking about making bed, which signifies that she is an expert when it comes to physical intimacy as well. But she does not have a say in choosing her husband. Moving on, talking about the impact of modernization on Bundeli weddings and how things have changed over times. So there's a substitution of pangats with buffets. So the personal touch has been lost because as I interviewed a folklorist, he said now on invitations they write that it is a swaruchi bhoj. So you come and you eat whatever you want. You just greet people, the host near the gate, and that is it. So the personal touch is lost. There are no more conversations. People are only concerned about the food they eat and then they leave. The substitution of traditional ritualistic songs with Bollywood themed sangeet. So the songs which were actually helpful, which started conversations which were very much needed for families, are no more there because these songs have been taken over by Bollywood sangeets, which are well choreographed performances. And even if we go to YouTube and search for these traditional songs, we will see a standardization in these songs. But the important quality was that of these songs was that they were very context specific, and there was a lot of spontaneity which with which these singers used to respond. So that is being lost. And, of course, there is a replacement of regional delicacies and seasonal foods with non-native cuisines. And this is a general opinion of all the women that I have interviewed over the course of 1.5 years, that weddings used to be community-centric activities. And now it is more like an individual-centered display of material wealth. Even the families which cannot afford big banquet halls, they are doing whatever they can. And so they are not, the weddings are not taking place in their homes as was the case earlier, which was more financially reasonable for them. But to protect their social image, basically, they are pushing their boundaries. And there's another song. There are excerpts from 2 songs, basically. So in every Bundeli wedding, the groom is Ram and the bride is Sita. So they are talking about how pattals are being laid. So if we talk about also from ecological perspectives, these rituals were more ecologically sustainable in their practice. Pattals are basically the paper plates which are being let down. And if you talk about potatoes, purple yam, taro root, so these are all seasonal fruits and vegetables which used to be cooked and were better for the digestion and the people in general. And there's an excerpt from another song where they are talking about how the mandapa used to be created with lush green bamboos, which is not the case anymore. So there are pre-constructed structures which are being used these days, and that is which is not even affordable for a lot of families, but they still do that to protect their social image that they are doing well financially. So these are the reference. I'm sorry I couldn't cover everything, all the aspects of these songs, but I did what I could. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kriti, for your presentation. Whenever we go towards this folk song specifically, this is what even when I was the director of the Folklore Center at Kutch University at my previous, appointment, This is something which I always insist as far as the researchers who are working on this specific field, because you are directly, coming in contact with this folk songs, this individuals who are carrying this legacy, this heritage. So your responsibility, this is again something which is ethical in nature. So your responsibility is higher than those individuals, because for them they are just songs. But for you as a
Right.
researcher, this is something which is more valuable. And when you put these songs on the platform of research, it becomes more valuable. So I would rather insist that also go towards the audio part of it. If you can sing any of them, if the researcher who is going towards these songs, at least go towards the originality of it. Once this generation will be gone, then we'll be away, far away from what these original songs, how they used to sing it. Fine. uh, Wherever you go, in every tradition we have these folk songs. But whenever if it is not carried to the next generation, for example, your mother or your grandmother or my mother and grandmother, they had this thing in their mind, so it was quite usual for them to carry this heritage. For us, again, you have also mentioned the impact of the modernization, and it is felt everywhere across India and globally, that we are not carrying this legacy in the way it used to. And due to the impact of cinema and other things, we are going the other side. So thank you for your presentation, Kriti. My observations, whatever you have gone through from the very beginning, when you were saying related to Bundelkhand and Bundeli, and then Jyonār, Gāri Gits. So I would request that you also recite, such songs. So it will be impactful whenever you carry this research to any of the platforms. So thank you, Kriti.
Sure.
If there are questions, we may go ahead with the questions. If not, then we may go ahead with the next presentation. Sudatta Ghosh has raised a hand.
Yeah,
Yes.
hi Kriti. Really good presentation. I really liked it because I'm also presenting in the same panel and along similar lines. And you mentioned James Scott, and I'm also looking at his work. Just a simple question, because you mentioned that a lot is being lost right now with modernization. But since we're talking about resistance, how are these communities, how are these people continuing to resist against what is already being lost? Because when you put it as a case of some things being lost, it seems it's all gone now, what to do? And the responsibility, like sir said, it's of course on you, of course, but I feel it's also on the people themselves if they want to preserve it at all, because it's their agency that probably matters more than yours, if it is their music and not just your music. So how are they continuing to resist against what is being lost?
Thank you for the question, Sudatta. So there are several more important factors which weigh in when we talk about these things. For example, the factor of caste, the factor of class, and the growing urban-rural divide. So I have conducted my fieldwork in Sagar district, which also comprises of several villages. And when I talk to women from different backgrounds, like this is a trend which is generally seen all over Bundelkhand, that the families from underprivileged caste and class are more concerned about these songs, traditional songs and heritage. Whereas if we talk about the privileged classes and castes, the women, they try to disassociate with Gāris in general, because there are expletives involved and there are cuss words involved. So there is this concept of Sabya Mahila, and you can also compare it with the concept of Bhadra Mahila, which you have in Bengal. So to appear sophisticated in the society, women from privileged sections of the society try not to associate with these songs, because that will not reflect well on their character. Because these days, these songs are considered vulgar, which was not the case earlier. So I've interviewed women who are in their 70s, in their 80s, and they have pointed this out. The same songs which are now considered vulgar were not considered vulgar or objectionable in their time. So the entire discourse on shame, censorship has changed over the years. What is considered acceptable in the society today has also changed. And when I have raised these questions to women from privileged sections of the society, that you do not get this platform to express yourselves anymore, and their response is that their images were more important in that aspect. They want to come across as Sabhya Mahilas, so they will rather suppress their emotions than express them freely. So, and of course, the agency lies with them. We cannot force anybody to continue the legacy or these songs and continue celebrating the heritage. Of course, it is their choice, but we can do what we can do.
We have two more questions. One, so
Sure, sir.
and I will, I request the questioners that please, brevity is the soul of wit. So ask in brief. We have Sweetie Ruel who would like to ask question to you.
Hi, Kriti.
Hello.
Hope I'm audible. So yeah, great
Yes, you are.
presentation. Thank you. My research is also around the weddings in Haryana and looking at the definitely ritual humor. So when you said that you quoted Winnington and Johnson, I guess, and you said that they probably don't know that they are actually resisting when they are
Some cases, yes, that's
Yeah.
not always the case. Yes.
So can you elaborate a bit more on it? That if they are not resisting, are they like contributing to the kind of hegemony they are living in? Like when you are not resisting directly, but you are doing a resistance at some point of time. So do you think that that can also be seen from a point of view of contributing to what is exactly happening in their society? I hope my question is
Kriti,
clear.
that was one of my research questions when I started the research. But when I conducted the research, I realized that this cannot be a yes or no question. It is much more complex than that. Of course, they are resisting, but sometimes they are also speaking from the same patriarchal discourse. For example, when I talk to women, and there is one more type of Gāri Geets, if you're familiar with, I talked about Jyonār Gāri Geets. There are also Vidai Gāri Geets. So they are sung during the farewell ceremony when the bride is leaving with the groom. So when those songs were sung, all the women, all the respondents present there were moved to tears. But after that, when I continued with the interviews and when they were talking about their daughter-in-laws, their tone changed. They thought that their daughter-in-laws were too bold, too demanding, living life on their own terms. So this keeps on happening. So whenever there is a Vidai Gāri Geet being sung, they will be nostalgic, think about the time they had to part with their families and then their daughters had to part with them. But the entire discourse will change as soon as they'll talk about their daughter-in-laws. So these things go hand in hand. This is not a yes or no question. Yes, but at times this happens, what you're pointing out, that while resisting also they can speak from the dominant discourse.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kriti. We have very less time left, 45 minutes to
Sure.
go. So,
Sir, can I
yes,
request
Kriti.
one thing? So
Sorry?
can we have all the questions at the back of
At
the
the end,
session?
yes. That's what I had in my mind. So let's
Okay.
go for the presentations first,
Thank
and
you,
we'll go for questions at the end of the presentation. So I invite Pranoy Saha. Pranoy Saha, you are there. Yeah. He is independent researcher, and the topic of his presentation is shaping a mythico-historical resistance, Mahishasura Martyrdom Day and the contestation of Brahmanical cultural hegemony. So, yes, Pranay, the stage is yours. Please go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you. Just give me a minute. Actually, I'm having an issue with my computer, so I'm using a tablet. So please let me know if my screen is visible and if my presentation is visible.
It's
Is my
visible.
pres
Go ahead.
is the presentation visible?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
please go ahead.
Okay. That's great. So yeah, good morning, everyone. I would like to begin by congratulating the organizers for putting up this extremely important conference. We live in a just a second, sorry. I'll put my timer also so that sorry. Yeah, we live in a hyper-capitalist world where casteist and racist ideologies are thriving, along with their hegemony over defining history and culture. In a country like India, which is home to diverse indigenous and subaltern traditions, this conference is very relevant. I express my gratitude to the organizers and to Dr. Solanki for giving me this opportunity, and I share my sense of excitement to learn from and engage with my learned panelists. In my presentation, I would like to talk about Mahishasur Smaran Sabha gatherings that are taking place in Kolkata and Bengal. For the last 2 years, I have been audience to the gatherings at Goria, Kolkata, organized by a cultural organization, Prakriti Shebashram Shangho. I did not attend these gatherings with a motivation to conduct research, hence my reflection here are limited to my engagement as an audience and a conscious revisiting of the secondary sources from online archives and my personal camera album. In this presentation, I will begin briefly by laying out historical and mythical layers that these gatherings make use of, gloss over some of the concepts that I borrowed for the paper in order to analyze these gatherings and share with you my experience of being an audience to these gatherings. In the last decade, the Mahishasur movement have been able to achieve a pan-India presence. The movement has been rallied around the figure of Mahishasur. A counter-hegemonic and a de-Brahmanized representation of Mahishasur has been asserted through this movement. Mahishasur, according to the Brahmanical narrative, belongs to the group of Asuras and Rakshasas who symbolizes evil, and hence the Brahmanical festivals celebrate the killings of these figures. Figures of Ravana, Holika, Hiranyakashyap, Mahabali receive a similar treatment as Mahishasur. The slaying of Mahishasur is celebrated in the form of Navaratri and Durga Puja. In Bengal, Durga Puja has become a dominant cultural marker. In 2021, Durga Puja in Kolkata was included in the UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The note on the Intangible Cultural Heritage website describes the festival of Durga Puja as the quote, best instance of public performance and religion and art, and as a thriving ground for collaborative artists and designers. End quote. The note further claims that during this festival, quote, the divides of class, religion, and ethnicities collapses as crowds of spectators walk around to admire the installations, end quote. But is this cultural narrative universal and uncontested? This is a concern that remains ignored and marginalized with the cultural naturalization of Durga Puja. The Mahishasur movement scrutinizes the mythical and historical legitimacy of Durga Puja. The method of this scrutiny shares its lineage with the anti-caste movement. The two major processes that they engage with in order to resist the Brahmanical hegemony are, firstly, the against the grain reading of practice, the against the grain reading practice of Brahmanical sacred literature, and second, the use of folk tales to create countermyth. Dr. Ambedkar, in his posthumously published seminal work, Riddles of Hinduism, identifies the narrative of Hindu goddesses fighting the wars against Asuras as one of the riddles. He writes, quote, in the Puranic times there were wars with the Asuras, as there were war in the Vedic times. The difference is that while in the Vedic times the wars with the Asuras are left to be fought by the gods, in the but in the Puranic times they were left to be fought by the goddesses. End quote. Mahatma Jyotiba Phule developed an imaginative polemic, Gulamgiri, which scrutinized the Brahmanical narratives of avatars. Gail Omvent, in her book Seeking Begumpura, The Social Vision of Anti-Caste Intellectual Rights, Phule attacked the avatars by historicizing the whole theory, ridiculing the mythology while using it instead as a metaphor for varying forms of Aryan invasions. At the same time, he incorporated the folk deities of Mahishasur, interpreting them as Sardars of King Bali. End quote. Represent, Phule presents Bali as a strong and valiant king who was the friend of the downtrodden. Phule incorporated the popular folk narratives from Maharashtra, Ida Pida Javo, Balicha Rajya Yevo. Let the sorrows and troubles go and the kingdom of Bali come. This helped in the creation of a strong countermyth. Another countermyth is contained in the cultural interpretation of the folk tradition of Dasai Nach among the Santhal community, where Santhal youths dressed as warriors uh, dance in a groups depicting an imaginary search for their lost tribal chieftain Hudur Durga, who was conquered through deceit. This counter myth has inspired many of the organizations in Bengal to also name Mahishasur Smaran Sabha gatherings as Hudur Durga Smaran Sabha. The slogans of Mahan Hudur Durgar Joy are asserted along with Mahan Oshur Samrat Mahishasurer Joy. These slogans populate the oral space of these gatherings. These gatherings make use of oral forms for the dissemination of knowledge and the proliferation of discourse. Public rallies, public lectures, poetry recitations, songs, and popular folk form of Kobigan are part of the schedule for these gatherings. Folk oral tradition of Kobigan and recitation of poetry have been part of the Dalit cultural sphere in Bengal, as oral was more accessible than the written to the masses. The use of Kobigan at these gatherings enables a non-elitist sphere of communication and aesthetics. In an article by Birati Bishwash on Bengali Dalit poet Gautam Ali, she writes that according to Ali, the tradition of Kobigan, quote, critically evaluates the society from the commoner's perspective, end quote. And aligning his practice with this tradition allows him to write in a language of his people to awaken them regarding their rights and self-respect. Kobigan is performed by a duet where the songster or poet takes on a persona and spars with the opponent. They use colloquial Bangla in their poetry and songs, asserting, quote, the dignity of the commoner's language to be an apt vehicle of good poetry, end quote. Kobi Uttam Sarkar and Liton Sarkar have been regularly performing Kobigan at the yearly gatherings at Goria, Kolkata. In last year's performance, Liton Sarkar took on the persona of a common villager. His demeanor and tone uh, was depicting a sense of gullibility, and his questions depicted him being empathetic to the dominant Brahmanical religion. He poetically strings together the questions from that perspective. What is the problem with Durga Puja? We knew Asurs were vile, greedy, and lustful. Then why are you celebrating Mahishasura and calling him Mahan? Why are you against the Brahmin priests? We respect them. They come to our homes, they bless us, and help the souls of our loved ones to reach heaven. These questions were posed to a public intellectual and social activist who was personified by the Kabi Uttam Sarkar. For the reply, his tone was assertive and confident. He explains how Asurs are civilizational ancestors to most of the populations who belong to Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi communities. How the Brahmins created the myths around these regimes to suppress their legacy and impose their oppressive and violent gods and goddesses. He used a lot of wit and cynicism as he decodes the popular superstitions that Brahmanical religion proliferates. His voice carried a lot of empathy as he explains how the dominant religion materially and spiritually exploits the subaltern masses. Exploitation in the name of offering and rites and rituals cost the people their hard-earned money, and the spiritual exploitation by them by professing regressive ideas of caste, karma, and rebirth, which dissuade people from blaming the oppressive and social structure for their plight, rather than holding their bad karma of last birth responsible for their present quote-unquote lower caste status. He emphasized the necessity of education in his words, reciting the teachings of Jagadguru Guruchar Thakur. ছেলে মেয়ে দেবে শিক্ষা দরকার হলে করবে ভিক্ষা. He cautioned, ভিক্ষা করে শিক্ষা দিতে বলেছে, ভিক্ষা করে কীর্তন করতে বলেনি. This is one of the many instances where the poet deconstructs the regressive effects of Brahmanical hegemony over religion and common sense. In this paper, among other ideas, I borrow from Gopal Guru's contextualization of the Gramscian concept of organic intellectuals to analyze these gatherings. Guru notes that there are two conditions for organic intellectuals. First, that they are able to present a transformative agenda. And second, that they move from a position of specific intellectual to universal intellectual. These gatherings, while centered around reimagining the figure of Mahishasura, have been able to develop an association with a distinct socio-cultural universe of Buddhism, which embodies the value of equality, equality, fraternity, liberty, and dignity of labor. The agendas and discourses of these gatherings are not rigid, rather constantly evolving. The pragmatic approach of the intellectuals and activists has allowed the movement to move ahead from merely creating negative consciousness than to provide a transformative agenda of cultural change and social justice. This can be observed in the movement's appropriation of the figure of Samrat Ashok and history of his Dhammo Vijay, and the reappropriation and the reinterpretation of the celebration of Bijay Dashami as Samrat Ashoker Dhammo Bijay Utsav. At last, I would like to invite everyone to collectively think about the difficulties of bringing contemporary movements like this, which directly confronts hegemonic culture and religion, into academic and institutional spaces. The activists, writers, and intellectuals behind these movements, like this work, like this movement, like this work under a lot of constraints and a lot of risks. The state disrupts and controls the visibility of these movements. The hegemonic religious forces and networks pose a real physical threat. We must remember the martyred activist Gauri Lankesh, who was fighting for a distinct religious recognition of the Lingayat community and engaged with the discourse on Mahishasur. These gatherings have been able to constitute a broader cultural space by accommodating figures from different geographies. Portraits of Buddha, Samrat Ashok, Mahishasur, Guruchat Thakur, Birsa Munda, Mahatma Phule, Savitri Phule, Chhatrapati Shahuji Maharaj, Narayan Guru, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and others occupy the makeshift stages of this gathering. But the question is, in spite of the attempt towards universality, how would the state and hegemonic forces respond to such a framing? Thank you.
Thank you, Pranoy, for your presentation. We'll take questions at the end of the session. So
Thank you.
I now request Sudatta Ghosh. Sudatta, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm there.
Yeah.
Can
Good
you
for-
hear me?
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Oh,
Sudatta Ghosh, she is a Ph.D. scholar at the Department of Sociology, South Asian University, and her topic is dancing, stigma, and resistance, an ethnography of morality and stigma of the Nachnis of Purulia. So, Sudatta, the stage is yours. Please go ahead with your presentation.
yeah, thank you. I'll just share my PPT. Is the PPT visible?
Yes, go ahead, Sudatta.
Aims to understand it's in West Bengal. The first map which you can see on the left is a map of West Bengal, and then after the map is the map of Purulia itself. So yeah. This presentation aims to understand how issues of morality associated with marginalized and gendered dancing bodies, like the Nachnis of
Sudatta,
Purulia.
sorry for the interruption. Your voice is breaking. Just off your video so that the connective issue will be resolved. Go ahead with your
Okay,
presentation. Put off your. Go ahead. Yes. Yes.
okay. Just a second. Yeah. Is it audible now?
It's audible. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay. So I'm looking at how notions of morality
The
associated with
presentation is not visible, Sudatta.
what? Okay. Is it visible now?
Yes, it's starting. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So Her notions of morality associated with marginalized and gender dancing bodies, the Nachnis of Purulia, have translated into how they are perceived in the private and public spheres. The Nachnis negotiate, contest, challenge, and reproduce the stigma that arises from their sex, gender, caste, intersectionality, and how they sexual embodied acts of resistance against stigma and whether daily acts of resistance contribute to the decolonization of the body. Some of the related questions I should attempt to answer in the paper in the presentation is how to work over time and across identities that lie at the intersection of sex, gender, and class. How stigma occupies multiple spaces, and how study of stigma in the lives of female dancing bodies the discourse of feminist historiography. So let me introduce you to the main characters in the ethnographic work, the Nachni and the Rohik. So who is the Nachni? Predominant in Purulia and spread across parts of Jharkhand. Nachnis hail from a long line of Dawai dancers. They're also known as Baijis or courtesans, who would erstwhile perform in the courts of princes and local zamindars of Bengal for their entertainment. Their performance was originally religious in nature, as the Humour songs they sang and danced were predominantly about the Hindu god and goddess Krishna and Radha. However, over the years, with the fading away of the zamindari system, the performance shifted to more of a Japa style of performance, when they would travel from one village to another, local folks, by singing Jyonār songs about their theme of love, not just singing love, but also love between two lovers, a wife and husband, or between the Nachni and her. Which brings me to the next question, which is who Roshi. Young women of Purulia would often fall in love with, run away with, or be sold by their families to Roshiks. These young women usually hail from extremely poverty-stricken families, often from lower castes. The Roshik was originally a connoisseur of the arts, that is, an expert in music, dance, and poetry, since the times of the zamindars. His contribution to the Nachni's life is varied. Sometimes he trains her in music and dance, and at other times, he acts as her manager and books performances for her and performs with her as a musician on stage. The Nachni shares a romantic relationship with the Roshik as well, despite the Roshik already having a legally married father. So the Roshik, this is important sort of information that is, the Roshik does not usually marry the Nachni legally. She does not marry the Nachni legally, but she still wears all the marks of a married Bengali woman, which is the Shiva Kapala. And he refused marrying her due to the social ostracization he might face in the village for being an upper caste man who marries a lower caste woman, and that to a woman who displays her body in the public. Urmila Sarkar has called their relationship as quasi-conjugal. So these are some of the images of Nachni and her Rochik. These are images of the Nachni during her performance along with several musicians. So the Nachni is described as a fallen woman. It is during her performance that she is present and remotely relinquishes the status of a precarious citizen. However, Urmila Sarkar argues that once the performance is over, the Nachni once again enters the shadows of a marginal existence, where she is the precarious citizen of the state. While the Nachnis occupy the category of quote-unquote folk performers, as they
Sudatta, you are not audible.
I think she is facing some sort of network issue. Let's wait for a minute or so, otherwise we may proceed for the last presentation.
saw connection.
Yeah, Sudatta, there are issues. Even the voice is breaking. So you can
Yeah.
accommodate yourself into a better place where you can get, connected, or the connectivity issue can be resolved.
Okay, that will take a little bit of time. Actually, I'm in my hostel, and the connectivity is a bit of an issue and I can't do much about it.
Take few minutes. We are going for the next presentation. Then we will come to your presentation.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Eliza, are you there? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, Eliza, she is MPhil scholar at the Department of History, University of Delhi, and she'll be presenting on haunting folktales, colonial spirits, and cinematic witches, making of modern spectral memories. So, Eliza, I invite you for your presentation. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir, and good afternoon, dear participants. I'm very happy to present the paper here. I'm very thankful for the opportunity. I'll just quickly share my slide with just a sec. Yeah, is my screen sharing? Is it visible?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Now?
It's getting shared. Yes, please go ahead.
It started, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is moving also?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, sir has already talked about my title. It is Haunting Folktales, Colonial Spirits, and Cinematic Witches, Making of Modern Spectral Memory. So, I'm a history student and I'm working on the idea of history and memory. So, I've tried to introduce that aspect in the reading of folktales, mainly associated with the idea of spirits, witches, ghost, basically. Now, this front page, which is the title of my presentation, is taken from a folktale which is known as the Brahmin Ghost. And the second slide, which you see, is of a movie. It is a Hindi cinema which stars Shah Rukh Khan and Rani Mukherjee. The name is Paheli, and it is set up in a medieval Rajasthan, and it is very similar to the story which we talked about the Brahmin's ghost. So it is very similar to the story, just the ending has been changed. Now, why the ending has been changed? So we need to understand the time and space also. So when we are talking of the folk tales, we are talking of the 19th century during the colonial time. And here the movie is obviously in 2005. So the movie takes a turn and it is talking about women agency, her desires, her choices. I'll just quickly tell you the story. So the Brahmin ghost story is like that one day the Brahmin went far away to earn some money, and then there is a ghost who takes the image of the Brahmin and return to his wife. And in the folk tale, it is seen that at last the wife is she lives happily ever after with the Brahmin himself and not the ghost. But in the movie, we see that there is the idea of consent, the idea of agency, because Rani Mukherjee is, there is idea of a loving husband, which the ghost provides her, and she claims her choice. And at the end, we see that the ghost, takes possess the body of her husband, and she's happy to know that. So that is a difference, basically. Before that, I've also given a definition which is given by Marion W. Smith. She's a folklorist of America, and she talks about that folklore could be it is a verbal art. We know that in a basic definition it is something passed down from generation to generation, but it can be in very varieties. It can be in form of music, dance, graphic, pictorial media, and now with the coming of cinema and social media, which is also a point of discussion in my presentation, we see how it is changing and how it has impacted our memory or our idea of ghost, basically. Now, this is the content of the presentation. I'll briefly talk about it. So it is orality to textuality. I'm starting from the colonial time when the folk tales were written and published. Then I'll talk about the colonial idea of spirit, Then I'll talk about the creative remembering and erasure. So I'm talking about the evolution of horror cinema in India, mainly the Hindi cinema. Then I talk about social media, basically, how it is acting as a digital archive to store the folklores, but it has its pros and cons. And lastly, the conclusion. So yeah, so from orality to textuality, I have referred the primary sources. Basically, it is around 1857 when the revolt happens, and it is also at that time when there are many ghost stories which are being written. Now, one of the important folklorists of obviously the colonial folklorist is William Crook, and he was known as for the colonialist people, that is for the metropolis, the British Raj, he was known as the father of folklores in India, and he has written a book, Folklores of Northern India, basically, and he also writes the Indian ghost story. Now we need to understand that what was the process of knowledge production and who were the people from whom he was collecting the information, because that is going to have an impact on the story which is freezed after it is written. So we see whether it is William Crook. The other source which I have used is the Folklore of Bombay, written by R.E. Enthoven. Then we have Folklore of Gujarat and Konkan, written by the same person. Then we have Bengali Household Tale. It is written by William Maculop. He was attached with missionary work. And then we have Folklore of Santhals, which is written by, again, a colonialist. And all these colonial people were attached to the Indian civil service. So one thing common is they were attached to the Indian civil service. They had the infrastructure. They have the colonial power in their hand, and they were using that to collect the stories. Now, in the collection of these stories, the native people of India were also adding into that, because obviously there was a language barrier, not with everyone. We know that colonial people did learn the language of here, but whether we talk about sati system in history or whether we talk about ghost, it is the Brahmins who were acting as a link between the folk and the colonial people. So, and basically the story is then dominated by Brahmanical hegemony. And briefly, I'll talk about that. So William Crook, I've talked about a story which is of a Brahmin family, and it is a ghost story. Basically, the Brahmin family, there is a man who goes to his family, but he get to know that his family has died, and everyone in the entire house is a bhoot, is a ghost, and that is something his wife tells him. And then his wife tells him that if you have a lota, which is of metal, basically, if you use that, because metal is something which is used to keep away the ghost, and you do the shroud of our family, we all will get the salvation. Now, this is something which is still relevant today. Now, this whole idea of shroud and everything is still relevant today. So we can see the story starting from the colonial time and continuing till today. So we cannot say, in terms of ghost, at least we cannot say that the folklores are dying. It is very much relevant today, and people are practicing that. Now, Folklore of Bombay, when we talk about that, again we see that there is a contestation in knowledge production. So the women body is acting as a site where knowledge is produced. Now, how it is so? So there is a story of Gidawa. Now, Gidawa is a woman, and she was seen as a witch by the people of the village. And what they do is that they start beating her until she dies. Now, their motive was not to, obviously, because his father was also involved in that, and he was also praying and asking the peers and the ojhas to beat her, so that the witch or the spirit could leave her body. Now, here the witch is not the witchcraft. Here it is basically the turel, what we say. Now, this is the nomenclature which is used. So here the colonial officers are not thinking of going to the legality of the issues or thinking of taking a human side, but they are taking it as we can say, as a chance to write a history of India which is Orientalist in perspective, which is showing that how India is a country of superstition and snake charmers. And we see it is not only R.E. Enthoven who is involved in it. There is A.M.T. Jackson, who was an Oriental scholar, and William Crook. Now, it is very interesting when they were collecting the folklores. What they did is that they hired prime school teacher, R.E. Enthoven. He hired primary school teacher, and he gave some questionnaires to them. Now, these questionnaires were fixed despite of the regional diversity in the belief and faith. And these questionnaires were prepared by William Crook. And now these questions have very fixed thing that, what happens to a woman who dies at childbirth. Now, the woman who dies at childbirth is known as the chudel. Or if she dies at when she's menstruating, because the idea of pollution and everything's come into play. So we see that the colonial people are not acting against it, but somewhere, seeing it as a site for knowledge production, and also somewhere very cohesively fixing it in the mind of people. And, if we read the folklore of Gujarat, it is very interesting that the folklore of Gujarat was compiled on the work of H.H. Risley. Now, H.H. Risley is the one who was also associated with census. And he came up with this idea of anthropometric data. The racism concept is very much based on that. And in the book, you will find that the Bhangis, now this is a word which was used at that time for the people of lower caste who were scavengers and seen as untouchables. And in the folklore, he's writing that cholera happened due to the Bhangis, and there is a whole folklore of story like that. So the caste dynamic, at one side, census is cohesively asserting the caste dynamic, and at the same time, folklores also compiled by the British officers is very assertive regarding the caste dynamics. And it will take time if I discuss all the stories, but it is same. It is by the colonial officers and the Brahmins. Now, this is what I have explained already. So basically, there is objectification of belief. Now, objectification of belief is what Bernard Cohen used for census, but it is also happening for belief. He says that when you ask question to people, when you are taking a survey for folklore, suppose, you ask them question and they think about it more and more. So somewhere folklore, which was an everyday practice, which was very usual and normal for them, now it is being asked to them, they are talking about it, and it is being more and more conditioned in their mind. Well, when I talk about the conclusion, I'll talk about the conditioning of mind and everything. So we see that with witchcraft, with idea of chudel, or with the idea of dain, or for say darkin, there is the idea of caste now, which is attached during the colonial time. Now, yeah, so now this is also, so there were two Hindi cinema. One is Junoon, which was a Mukesh Bhatt movie, and there is Kaal, which is a recent release. Now we see that these two folklores were very much prevalent in the folklore of Gujarat and Maharashtra, which talks about that if someone is killed by a tiger, either he becomes a tiger or he becomes a ghost, and then he takes revenge to the people. So this is the same storyline on which the movie is made. And the interesting fact about this Junoon movie is that at the end, when they need a cure to kill the anti-hero, which is obviously Rahul Roy, who takes the shape of the tiger, it is the British officials who know the knowledge how to kill a tribe, how to kill that person. So something which was in the tribal culture is not known by the tribal population there, because there is a tribal person in the movie as well, but is known by the British official. So this process of writing the folktales was very much a colonial project. Now, what about the native compilers? It was not only that the Britishers were doing that. There is Lal Bihari Dey, and he was the one who wrote that story about the Brahmin. He also writes A Ghostly Wife, and most of the story of his is on the Brahmin family. He was a Bengali Indian, he was a journalist, and he converted to Christianity, and he wrote folk tales of Bengal. Now, Vladimir Prop, he's basically a Russian folklorist, and he says that if you see folklores, there will be, the name of the characters will be changed, but more or less the story will be same, and there will be a happy ending. And this could be very much applied to the folk tales of Lal Bihari Dey. If you read about Ghosli Bai, or if you read about the Brahmin story, which I talked about in terms of the movie Paheli, we see that there is a happy ending and they're happy ever after. There is an anti-hero, which is a villain. There is a hero, which happens in Hindi cinema also. Now talking about the female colonialist, and there are two examples. This is Mary Crocker and Alice Perrin. They were basically the main sahibs in the booths of bungalow. I've used the title because this was the time when this whole genre of horror story started, when there is a bungalow and there will be a caretaker, and the gates will slowly open and there will be a caretaker with a lantern, and that sort of a story. And it started with the main sahib, basically the wife of the officers, the British officers. And we see that there is a difference in both the aspect as well. When we talk of Mary Crocker, she talks of a story of a dark bungalow, and how a colonial official is killed, and he's killed by the caretaker. Is the story. So somewhere the revolt of 1857 is very important here, because it is after that they are writing the story. And because in 1857 revolt, India also participated, and there was a violence which was associated, we see that they are seeing the Indians, for example, it is the ayah or the caretaker. They are the people who are the anti-hero, killing the British officials, killing basically the main sahibs, and they are returning as ghosts and taking revenge. So this is the time when this sort of a story started. So there was also ideology of Raj, and you can see I've put a poster of the movie 1920, which is based on this colonial setup. Now, creative remembering and erasure is basically talking about the evolution of Hindi cinema. And it is very important to understand that for the longest time, Hindi cinema was very much dominated by the idea of colonial spirit. Whether you see of possessed doll, whether you see of bungalows, this was the story which was very much there. So the idea is, earlier it was folklore, which was oral, then it became written, and it had the colonial perspective added to it. And that colonial perspective is something which we see in the Hindi cinema. Okay, but obviously then what about the Indian idea of ghost? So when we see the folk tale, the primary sources which I've mentioned, in India there is an idea of cultural monster. So, and it could be traced from ancient till medieval and modern time. There is a concept of asura, which is the idea of otherness, asura and deva and asura. But these are cultural monster. So to say, there is a gray area to it. There is a multicultural and multi-layered idea of good and bad, not like the Western civilization where there is good and evil spirits. That is why I've used the term colonial spirits. But it was not talked about in the Hindi cinema for the longest time. But in the last line I have written that now with the movie like Tumbad, or basically a Pari, which was of Anushka Sharma, and there is the Ifrit mythology which is used. Now it is a Persian mythology. It came into India with the Persian. So this is how the daily soaps and the movies represent a witch. Whether you talk of the movie like Stree, or whether you talk of a serial like Nazar, it is very much based on what the colonial idea of everything was. This is what, I've already explained that. So it is very interesting. I was taking an oral interview of the people in my city, Delhi, and there is a village here. And if you ask them about Dakin or Dayan, it is not only a ghostly spirit, but any woman who is very notorious, quarrelsome, or troublesome in a family, she is also associated with Dayan. So, Dayan or Dakin, these were a metaphoric word also, which has now been used for a woman who is not under the norms of the society. The whole idea of chastity and everything which was shown in Hindi cinema also. And if you talk about, so my hometown is Jharkhand basically, and if you talk about the whole idea of witchcraft and everything, there are writings which says that during the colonial time it was also a method of resistance by the tribal because the colonial were attacking their culture. And if you talk with some women, they say that there was an exercise of power which they could do because the Dayanas were regarded with fear and respect. But if you see the recent studies, we find that it is not something very much a resistance, but it is an attack on the lower caste women, and it is also related to the idea of control on the sexuality of women, on the to take some property. These are the ideas which leads to witchcraft in the contemporary time. So in the earlier time, witchcraft was very different. When it was in the form of folklore, it was a belief, and people believed that this spirit in the village could protect the spirit. So there was this idea of praying and rituals which was attached to it. But as soon as the colonial intervention happened and there was a caste dynamic which was played, it was much more used as a weapon or tool to control the women, to take their property, and to show, as I said, the othered identity. So someone who is not timid, or she's very bold or strong. So to tame that sort of a woman, this whole identity started to take into picture. And I'm taking, I think, very longer. I'll just conclude. So digital memory sites. So basically, this is Spotify, which is a podcast, Instagram. These also act as a memory sites. Now, what is memory sites? So this is an idea of Pierre Nora. He's a French historian, and he suggests that there are many memory sites. Now, it could be anything. It could be shows, movies, monuments. It could be places. For example, bungalow is a place. It could be a haunted house. So it could be places, museum, anything which somewhere over represents any idea. Through mediation and remediation, and this conditions the mind of the people to think in a certain way. So these evolutionary history which are presented of the ghost and spirits, everything play a very important role. Folklore is not something which, it's a living fossil. We cannot say that folklore regarding the ghost and spirits are dying. It is not dying. These ideas are also available in oral or a generational transmission form. But with the changing circumstances, with the written, then the media, television, everything, there is a change which is happening. There is an evolution which is happening. And that has created our modern memory of ghost. So when we think of ghost, for example, my mother says, don't, in some village there is a Dayan, and there is another which will happen, and an evil eye, all sorts of this thing is something which every household, I'm not generalizing, but more or less there is an idea which we talk of. If we don't talk of witchcraft, we definitely talk of ghosts or spirits, and how there is a bungalow or a haunted house and we went there. So this is something which has shaped our memory of ghosts. So at the moment,
sorry for the intervention, but yeah. We have very few minutes left.
I've just completed. These are the references, and that was the conclusion basically. What is the idea of Pierre Nora? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Eliza. Thank you, Sudatta. If you are available, can you just
I'm here.
Yes, Sudatta.
Sorry. One of the great joys of living in the hostel, probably. I'll just share my screen. Can you tell me till which part?
We have gone through your presentation halfway out. So if you can, just go for the concluding remarks, what exactly, your presentation is all about and what exactly your paper is all about, that would suffice the cause.
Okay, I was not halfway through, but okay, I'll do that. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, it's working. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I basically introduced the Nachnis and the Roshi. So yeah, So while the Nachnis occupy the category of folk performers as labeled and recognized by the government of West Bengal, their identity as Baiji dancers from an era before has managed to stay. They're categorized as quote-unquote folk performers, but the kind of dance they perform, the environment in which they perform, their relationship with the audience, the different gazes they experience, both in the public and private sphere, it all indicates towards a different world of dance altogether, one that exists in the shadows of society, one that is not meant to be displayed openly, one that upsets the sensibility of the more dignified classes of society or the Bhadraloks, and one that drives dancing bodies like Nachnis and others to the very peripheries of society. So the Nachnis are steeped in a history of stigma as they were once court dancers. In the present context, she performs in various villages across Purulia, and the audience mostly comprises of men. She's not only gazed at for visual pleasure, but the close proximity of her body to the male-dominated audience due to the absence of a proscenium makes it a challenging profession to be in. Nachnis are akin to performers like the Tamasha and Lavani dancers of Maharashtra or the orchestra dancers of Northern India, who are considered part of an economy of sexual excess. And I borrow this from Shailaja Paik's work on the Lavani performers. Thus, many in Purulia and beyond consider the Nachnis profession as Nongra Bapsha or dirty business. The Nachni's gender identity and that of being a performer works in close connection to her caste identity. Many Nachnis belong to what is considered lower castes in the region and have surnames such as Shordar, Shing Shordar, Kalindi, Bhumij, Mura, and a few others. These performers are stigmatized and their stigmatization happens at the intersection of caste, gender, and their profession. So I borrow the phrase sex, gender, caste complex from Shailaja Paik's work, which she explained as the sexual and gendered arrangements of the caste system as they operated to oppress Dalit Tamasha women, and from within which those women sought to constitute themselves as strong, successful, and willful artistic agents. In my work, I discuss how these categories intersect in the lives of the Nachnis to shape the very subjectivity of the performer. Oi dekho, Nachni hete jacche. Look, there goes a Nachni. These are the words Pobita, a 27-year-old young Nachni dancer, has often heard from women as she draws water at the common well in her village. This is due to the bright colored saris she often wore, which is an association with a woman of a loose moral character. She narrated to me that Nachnis wear extremely bright saris, studded with sequins during their performance to attract the attention of the audience, consisting of mostly men. But wearing similar saris while doing the household chores becomes a symbol of a woman who is not chaste, who is not a good wife, and who is of a loose moral character. I will not go into the literature review and all of that because I've already wasted quite a bit of time. But quickly going into a bit of the work that has been done on within the dance studies and performance studies. With regard to dance, there has been a lot of ethnographic work on Devdasis of Tamil Nadu, where we have seen that how the men of the upper caste defiled and stigmatized the dancing body of the Devdasis who came from lower caste groups. And thereafter, there was the anti-Nach movement, and we know that story, and I will not go into that. But in the case of West Bengal, instead of a single classical dance form, West Bengal is popular for many folk dances. It is essential to understand what the folk culture of Bengal comprises and how caste is intertwined in this understanding. Acharya has defined the folk culture of Bengal, or Lokosanskrit, as comprising features like myths, mythologies, religion, magic, customs, etc., pertinent to certain rural communities. Common perceptions of folk also include folk being something rooted in traditions and folk communities being very strongly resistant to change. And this very stringent categorization of folk or performance into classical and folk has proven nothing but harmful for various marginalized performers, the Nachnis being one of them. Stigma has resulted to a great extent for the Nachnis from this categorization, from the very usage of the word folk. Thereafter, in my work, I also talk about how the Nachnis are at the receiving end of stigma from not just the audience, but the family, neighbors, NGO workers, state officials, and the state plays a very important role here. The Nachnis are at the receiving end of the male gaze. Their performance space is always surrounded by men, and so I also argue that there are a lot of descriptions of folk performances that romanticize how the folk artists have a more authentic connection with their audience, and how the performer and artist, because the performer and the artist are at the same level, there is no hierarchy because the performer is on the ground and the audience is also sitting or watching from the very ground level. But I also argue that such romanticization of the folk forget to take into consideration the very real potential of violence that female folk artists like the Nachnis often face due to the lack of a proscenium and due to the lack of a distance, a very physical distance between herself and the audience. The male gaze does not stay limited to just gazing, but for vulnerable individuals, it can prove to be physically violent. So beyond the stage, the Nachnis are at the receiving end of stigma from her family, community, state, and civil society. The stigma that she faces is often a result of certain moral codes that have been put in place by the ruling elite or sections of society that I have already referred to, that we know as the quadrilo. So, but this is not to say that the Nachni is completely devoid of any agency. Her everyday resistance lies in her ability to negotiate day after day as she performs in potentially risky and violent surroundings. It is the very objectification and desires for her body that she utilizes to command over the men around her. She holds their attention during the performance by moving her hips more than any other part of the body. This is where the male gaze, which is supposed to be active, and the woman, who is supposed to be passive, undergoes a momentary role reversal. She momentarily controls the gaze of all the men watching her. So yeah, I will just go into the last bit because, yeah. So in this paper, I argue for a feminist and decolonial historiography. It is the larger goal or direction in which my work is aimed, I believe. So what do I mean by a feminist and decolonial historiography? I argue that history has been written in a particular manner because it has been written by particular privileged and powerful sections of the country. A feminist and decolonial historiography aims to not get rid of those existing narratives, but to question them, build upon them, challenge them, and attempt to bring into the conversation the various other voices that have existed but have been overlooked and invisibilized. The Nachnis and other performers like the orchestra dancers of Northern India, the Kalbelia dancers of Tamil Nadu, and several others have contributed to a conversation on gender, caste, class, and everyday resistance. Nachni practices resistance every day in ways that might not seem like outright dismissal of power, but which has contributed to discomfort and apprehension among the various dominating factors in her life, like the state NGO, male program organizers, the audience, popular dancers and choreographers as well. She does this resistance through her bodily movements and gestures mostly. Her style of uncodified dancing is one form of bodily resistance to the dominant discourse in dance that has its origin in the Natyashastra, and which lays down the discipline style of dancing followed by classical dance forms in India. The Nachni digresses from the holy book of performance, and that has resulted in stigmatization at the hands of powerful and the elites of society, both in the field of dance and otherwise. Those, and there are many who live by the dictates of the Natyashastra, have accepted and even uphold the rigidity and exactness, the discipline that the text calls for towards not just performing, but teaching and learning movement styles and gestures. The text upholds a Brahmanical representation of India, and while many benefit from such a representation, it is groups like the Nachnis that are left behind in the shadows of society, grappling to meet the expectations and moral standards of upper caste class dancers. The inability to meet the expectations has brought upon them their visible doom, and yet resistance persists in many ways, such as through her disregard of traditional conjugal and family values, as well as her seductive gestures that control the gaze of the male audience. The Nachni is not a state-aligned body, as her unruly and uncodified body does not fit the state's narrative of authentic, quote-unquote, authentic culture and heritage. To conclude, I would just like to say that the history of performance in India has focused on the study of largely female and male classical dancers of higher caste class and their stories. However, through my work, I argue that there is an urgent need to engage with subaltern artists and performers who do not fit into the colonial, post-colonial, and statist understanding of the body, especially the dancing body, which does not confirm and challenge challenges notions of stigma and morality to decolonize the dancing body. Such artists, through their movements and gestures on the stage and beyond the stage, attempt to enforce the practice of the permanent decolonization of thought. Cultural theorist Brahma Prakash has argued that be it through imperialism or caste-based colonization, colonialism in all forms has continuously annihilated the creative power of the individual as well as the collective. There is a need to go beyond the counter discourse and create an alternative discourse that speaks against the language of the dominant. I believe that the Nachnis do so in the form of their everyday resistance and the use of various tactics. However, as I proceed with this project, which is nowhere near completion yet, I am also cautioned against viewing Nachnis in a binary form, where she is only as a recipient of stigma and as resistance towards stigma. No, she also reproduces stigma because Nachnis are not living lives in isolation from the moral standards perpetrated by the networks she is part of. So Nachnis also stigmatize other Nachnis. Nachnis also stigmatize other kinds of even more so marginalized performers. The conversations that need to happen on feminist and decolonial historiography must be open to a nuanced understanding of the subjectivities of such performers. One needs to also constantly problematize, question, and challenge the existing understanding of the term folk itself. Lastly, a crucial aspect of this entire project is my own positionality as a Savarna scholar and dancer, which I also look at through the lens of reflexivity in my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudatta. So now, as we have very less time left, we have already crossed the limit. It was, 1:15, but we have crossed it. But then the house is open for a few questions, and then we'll go with the conclusion of the session. So, yes, any questions from the one who were there? For Kriti, Pranoy, Sudatta, and Eliza.
So Priyanka has asked a question in the chat box.
You may proceed further.
Yeah, should I answer?
Yeah, Eliza, please go ahead.
Yeah, Priyanka. So yes, if we talk of Hindi cinema, see, it was not always that they have made movies like this, but if we talk in context of Paheli, yes, it was definitely the time period also, because any of the story, if we take of that time, during the colonial time, it lacked, we could not think of a story like that, while I was seeing the primary folklores. But yeah, in terms of Paheli, it was definitely, Rani Mukherjee had an important role to play rather than Shah Rukh Khan, and it was centered around her and talking of female agency. But there are very few films like that, is what I'm trying to say. Because for the most of the time, the Hindi cinema was also very stereotypical, and it is till now also very stereotypical and very sexist in terms. If you see the earlier horror cinema, and especially at the time when there were B-grade Hindi cinema also being made, which was which was not talking or taking off the folklores. But because Paheli was based on folklores, it was it was interesting, and it did change because of the time period. And also I feel because Shah Rukh Khan was there and they had to make it more romantic, I feel, and a happy ending. So maybe that is why they they chose it to end like that. But it was a good move, I would say.
Thank you for answering.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for the question.
Anybody else would like to ask anything? Otherwise, we may proceed further for the concluding remarks. So, thank you, Pranoy. Yes, Pranoy.
Hi. Actually, I wanted to ask something to Sudatta. Sudatta, as you also mentioned Professor Brahma Prakash, and I was taken to his work on cultural labor, where he sort of posits cultural labor in contradiction to cultural capital, right? Where the traditional folk artists who have been engaged in this sort of performance tradition, which have got them this associations with sort of vulgarity and obscenity, but he also sort of sees in other forms like Gadar, where he's like the Balladeer Gadar, where he is sort of saying that these forms can also be repackaged through ideology into something which is transgressive in a more direct sense. So, do you see any sort of possibilities in the tradition of Nachnis of that kind of a leap? Yeah, that's something that I was just wondering.
Thank you.
Ideological transgression, and what can you be a little more specific? Like what you mean? In like an example of what you mean by it.
Uh, uh, by that, I would mean like Nachnis sort of forming an association or sort of coming together in a
Yeah,
political
yeah, yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so I could not speak about it because I mean it's just 15 minutes and I messed up my audio and everything, as you saw. So there is so Nachnis work very closely with this NGO called Durbar, and Durbar works with the Shonagachi sex workers in West Bengal. Shonagachi being one of the largest red light areas of Asia. So and there is a lot of complexity in the relationship that Nachnis have with Durbar, because Durbar sort of went in and like a savior and to save these other marginalized, not just sex workers. So they went in to work with the Nachnis back in 2007 and 8. But when I was working with the Nachnis, they also told me, Didi, like Durbar works with us, and we are really glad because they have been able to mobilize on that front with Durbar because of the assistance of Durbar. But what has also happened is there's a lot of uh, common understanding that the Nachnis are also sex workers. Why else are they working with a organization that works with sex workers? So there has been even more stigmatization somehow because of that mobilization with this NGO. So I would say, and I call that mobilization political in itself, but it has had while it has helped them, they have been able to come together in a physical space, in a very concrete physical space together. It has also led to further stigmatization as well because of their association with Durbar, and it's a very complex situation. And I look into their relationship with the NGO as well in that context. So I don't know if I answered somewhat your question.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you did.
Thank you, Sudatta. Anita Saini, she wants to ask something. Yes, Anita. No, okay. So let's go for the concluding remarks. We have already crossed the time limit. It was indeed
I think
insightful session
I,
as far as this entire session is concerned.
sorry.
Yes, no?
There's a question in the chat box. So if I could just quickly answer that.
Yes, in a minute. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, yes. So Kanya, there is a direct connection, and actually there is also this connection with in the folklore of Maharashtra. As I mentioned, Jyotiba Phule also writes about Mahabali, and he sorts of puts the Vamana character as the evil and sort of the Mahabali as the benevolent king. So there is this connection with Maharashtrian folklore with the figure of Mahabali, which is also popular in Kerala. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Pranoy. Uh, so all the four presentations were very insightful, and I hope that this rigorous research endeavor will continue, and the other researcher who were here present, they will also get benefit of it. And specifically when I talk about Kriti or Pranoy or Sudatta and Eliza, what they have reflected is how we can take the folk studies to another level. Fine. Resistance when it comes to the mainstream literature or mainstream, social realism or what next, what we can say. But as far as folklore is concerned, the other side of the coin is still yet to, yet to be explored. And these attempts are very good. When we talk about folk studies, we have been, we have been taught this since our childhood that, see, these are the witches. This is not the right place to visit. But there must be something, a tale behind every statement made to us. And when we talk about the Gāri, you visit any of the traditional places, any place or any wedding, you'll find the same thing across all cultures. Even when it comes to Gujarat, we have this tradition when they welcome the bridegroom and when they welcome the bride at the home. Fine. So the in-laws welcome with the Gāris, and same thing is there. So we need to go for rigorous efforts here. So thank you all for your presentations, and now let's conclude this session. We have already crossed the timeline. So thank you again to all the organizers and the Center for Folklore
I'd like
Studies
to-
and Research. Yeah, Mritika, please go ahead.
Is there Himani, our volunteer? Actually,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, Himani is there. So I would like to request Himani to give the vote of thanks to the presenter and the sir as well. Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of the organizing team, I would like to give our heartfelt gratitude to you, so that the way you have comprised all the essence of the paper presentation and all, and how the way you moderated the session. Thank you so much. And now over to you, Himani, to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Am I audible? Okay. I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this special occasion. I would like to thank all the honorable delegates who blessed us with their presence. I would also like to thank Team CFSR for hosting such an incredible event. I especially want to thank our chair, Dr. Milind Solanki, who is an assistant professor, Department of English Studies, Central University of Gujarat, for gracing his presence and took time to be a part of the event. I would like to thank all the 4 brilliant paper presenters with their brimming papers and incredible topics. You all were really amazing. I would extend my heartful gratitude to all the curious and patient participants, because without your presence, the event would have been lost its charm. Thank you so much. And lastly, I would thank all our coordinators, our rapporteurs, and our data analysts for tirelessly working day and night and making this session a great hit. Thank you so much. I hope we will continue networking and make this a global village. Your participation has truly made this event a memorable one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Himani, Mritika, and to all the participants. If whosoever is interested to work on Gujarat and folklore and folk studies in Gujarat, I welcome you all. I have posted my mobile number there for your reference. So if you're interested to work on this particular region, you are welcome. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Himani. You people are doing great. Our volunteers, they are so active, the way they are doing all the stuff. Thank you. Thank you there for giving the vote of thanks as well. Let us conclude this session. We will be meeting after our lunch break. Our next session will be starting at 1:55. The name of the session would be Heritage, Tourism and Material Culture. We'll be seeing you soon.